Good afternoon, everyone. I am Bianca Durrani, President and CEO of Aperio Philanthropy. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar. We are co-hosting this webinar with NYU's School of Professional Studies and are delighted to bring together this panel of experts from the field for conversation today. Aperio Philanthropy is a nonprofit consulting firm with a vision for a world in which everyone can thrive. We exist to unleash the power of communities to drive real change in the world by dramatically expanding resources for nonprofits. Day to day, what that means is that we work alongside community leaders and fundraisers to develop simpler, faster, and smarter ways to generate revenue for nonprofit missions. And our clients span a range of sizes and mission areas across the country. As a firm created to drive change, we're thrilled to be hosting this event series. For the past few years, NYU and Aperio have facilitated conversations about the role of philanthropy and nonprofits in driving societal change and solving complex problems. Today's event is part of the series focused on a question that is top of mind in a year of so much uncertainty and risk, which is how do we build resiliency in our organizations and our missions? We've talked about various aspects of resiliency, including building real relationships and diversifying revenue. And today's webinar is going to focus on one of my favorite topics, which is metrics and how we use them well to build organizational resiliency. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our co-host, Michelle D'Amico.
Thanks, Bianca. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Michelle D'Amico, and I'm the Director of Continuing Education and Public Programs at the NYU SPS Center for Global Affairs, or CGA. Since its founding, our goal at the Center for Global Affairs has been to prepare global citizens to make a positive impact in the world. We do this through a variety of activities, including our 2 graduate programs, one in Global Affairs and another MS in Global Security, Conflict, and Cybercrime. We also offer a wide variety of skills and knowledge-based continuing education courses and offer public events such as this that expand upon the topics covered in our classrooms. We're also very proud to be home to the George H. Heyman Jr. Program for Fundraising and Philanthropy. Through our open enrollment courses, on-site intensives, and certificate in fundraising, we offer professionally oriented educational options for those looking to enter or grow within the fundraising field. Courses are taught by practitioner faculty who bring their vast experience, expertise, and networks to the classroom. We'll send out additional information after today's event, so feel free to reach out with any questions you might have. And now I'm delighted to introduce today's moderator. Beth Katz-Nelson is a nationally recognized development professional with over 25 years of experience leading strategic planning, fundraising, management, campaign development, and staff and volunteer training initiatives and programs. She's the founder and principal of Contributing Factor Consultancy, which works with nonprofits around the US to assess and develop fundraising programs while helping to strategize and strengthen the underlying and critical systems necessary to run a successful development team. I'm also very delighted to share that she's a faculty member in our program and teaches a course on strategies for donor analytics, moves management, and prospect research. And now, without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Beth for today's discussion.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you and a pleasure. So in today's uncertain world, we certainly need nonprofits more than ever, but the uncertainty absolutely affects nonprofits as well, and it complicates everything from strategic planning to service delivery. For fundraisers, the demands are high, raising funds today and delivering growth for tomorrow. So the word metrics sparks many feelings for fundraisers, from a sense of stability to frustration with unattainable goals. At their best, however, metrics create a practical roadmap for aspirational goals we work towards as fundraisers. They keep our outreach consistent throughout the year, enabling us to reach a large community of supporters and form lasting relationships. So today's panel with our wonderful speakers will discuss why metrics are so central to fundraising success and resiliency, how teams and individual fundraisers can use them most effectively, and how they can create a healthy culture around metrics. It is my pleasure to introduce today's distinguished panel, starting with Michael Card. Michael is a member of a dynamic team of fundraising professionals at Cal State Fullerton, a public comprehensive regional university that serves 41,000 students. As a senior executive director of development, Michael and his team manage advancement functions of the College of Engineering and Computer Science, College of Natural Sciences and Mathematics, and the Arboretum and Botanical Garden at Cal State Fullerton. Michael. Liz Fitzgerald has been at ACLU since 2008, joining the organization to direct the mid-level program. In 2019, she became the director of development, and she now oversees donor acquisition, annual giving from donors in the annual fund, mid-level and major gift programs, as well as the operations of the development department. Melanie Burmaster holds the position of Vice President of Philanthropy at the Food Bank of New York City, celebrating a notable 30-year tenure in the fundraising sector. Throughout her career, Melanie has generated over $75 million in support for education, research, arts, culture, and community programs. Leah Petrovani-Miller, as the managing director at Apiro Philanthropy, Leah leads projects to support nonprofit organizations towards sustainable, ethical, and scalable revenue growth. Leah partners with nonprofits on strategic growth initiatives, including building major gift programs and advancing growth at capital campaigns. So it's a pleasure to have all of you. And let's get started on today's conversation. So first, let's set the stage of today's discussion, throwing out a question to all of you that we can have a general conversation together. So I guess for all of you, each individually, what has been your experience with metrics in your career as a fundraiser and then also as a leader in the industry? And who would like to start?
Beth, I'll be happy to start. Thank you for the introductions, and thank you to our host. Thank you to our guest, and to my fellow esteemed panelists. Thank you for being here today as well. So I'm Michael Karg. I have had a career in higher education, and I really don't have many issues with metrics. My entire career in higher education, in fundraising, we've always had metrics, mostly around dollars raised, and contacts have been kind of the two largest metrics. But depending on what campus you are and what industry you're in, there's a lot of variations to that. And I think metrics are healthy for organizations. However, why I'm excited about this conversation today is I think that how those metrics are expressed, the environment in which they are applied, and the disconnect oftentimes with expectations are what can give metrics a negative connotation.
Absolutely. Liz?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Liz Fitzgerald. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the director of development at the ACLU. And, like Michael, I've had metrics throughout my whole career. I've been doing fundraising for 30 years now. And so granted, what they are today versus what they were back then, very different. But at the the differences in the scale. At the end of the day, it's really those core things that you need to drive the program that are really the most key and important part of the work we do. I think that sort of following on what Michael said, it really is that we're in a world where they're much more prevalent, and they're prevalent across a lot of different industries in the work, and the ability to get them so much quicker, faster, all different cuts and views on the data. And so it's really about, for me, it's always the question between what is a nice to have and what is a need to have, and what am I going to do differently tomorrow based on having this data. So excited to dive into this with all of you.
Thank you. Melanie?
Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. Hope you're having a great day. If you're here in New York City, the sun is popping out, which is fabulous. So for me, I've been doing fundraising for 30 years, and I think early on in my career, I always wondered, why do we have these metrics? And as you emerge into leadership, you do understand why. I've been around since the days of somebody wrote a book that it took 18 months to get a major gift, and then for years, that was what everybody thought it was. And I'm sure it was probably like Cornell University, and they had a system, and they've been doing fundraising for years and years and years. But it's definitely changed for me. And I think for me, what I'm excited about this conversation is because you have to have metrics, right? Because it sets the tone for the organization. It allows you to plan for strategic growth. It allows you to take some risks, also to shift what needs to be, you know, to meet the needs of what's happening in the external world, right? And things that are influencing the organization. And for me, you know, we have metrics, but then also soft metrics. And how do we, my goal is really using the metrics, but making them so personal and humanizing them, right? So, because that at the end of the day, we are relationship builders. So that's kind of, you know, how I'm viewing metrics these days.
Excellent. And you bring up some really important points of the why, and we get lost sometimes and caught up in the day to the day, and the why sometimes disappears. So we'll definitely touch on that. Leah, before we get to that point.
Great. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be together today. And I also am enjoying the little bit of sun that we have in New York City because we're going on maybe day 7 of rain, and it's been pretty terrible. But as Beth mentioned in the introduction, I am a managing director at Aspirational Philanthropy and have a couple of different lenses through which I'm entering this conversation. One is as a fundraiser myself, I've been in teams that had no metrics beyond just the main target of revenue goals. And that has its own set of challenges in and of itself. Of you meet your revenue goal and then the goalpost is moved further because you haven't met that goal. And so then the goal doesn't actually feel like an actual goal. It just is a goalpost that continues to be pushed down the field, to use a sports analogy. I've also been in teams where I've seen either metrics that weren't totally utilized or an absence of metrics where I built a metrics framework for myself and my team. And then as a consultant, I help dozens of organizations create metrics frameworks, but probably more importantly, utilize them. I fully believe that metrics are only as effective as our activities towards them and what we're driving towards. They're not a means in and of itself. They are the path towards an end goal. So I think metrics as an individual contributor are a great way to hold yourself accountable, to track towards your progress, to forecast for needed adjustments, to try new things, to experiment, to be bold. And then as a manager, as someone who's overseeing a team and you're holding folks accountable to their metrics, it's a very helpful forecasting tool. It's a helpful benchmarking tool as well, and ultimately a way to activate the activity that we know, because research and science tells us, gets us towards the ultimate goal of that revenue goal, but helps teams really track the activities that we believe lead towards revenue generation in a way that is holistic for those relationships where donors really truly are building relationships with organizations. It's getting away from transactional fundraising into deeper relationships that are two-way with donors.
Excellent, thank you. So Liz, if you want to start the conversation, moving into, you mentioned some of the why and discussing a little bit of the fundamentals and the metrics and how they're used, or maybe how you've used them.
Yeah, so when I think about what are metrics, a lot of times it's a source of contention is what they are more than anything else. We often find that you can spend so much time figuring out what are the different ways you want to look at things and how you want to do it. But I think what, at the end of the day for us and at the ACLU, so we're using metrics across our annual giving, our major giving, and all of these different areas. And I think we often think these are all very different things and they all need specialized reports, and to a certain extent they do. But at the end of the day, what we're really measuring is file health, and that's what we're constantly talking about is, and really to Leia's point, are the inputs that we're doing giving the results that we want. And so, when we're looking at it for grassroots donors, it's how many new donors are coming on? Did we retain them? Did we reactivate them? What's the average gift? How much did it cost to raise that dollar? And was it worth it? It's really the same thing when you get to the portfolio. We are looking at moves management a lot there, but it's also that same idea of, are the cohort of people that we're working on, do we have enough people coming in to replace the people who are moving off? And are we treating people well enough and in the right ways to ensure that they stay with us over time? So I really think about it that way, in terms of are we doing the right things to keep the file where it needs to be to meet the goals that we have? And if it's that we want to grow significantly, are we bringing on more new donors? And what is the balance between all of those different pieces? So really, particularly in leadership, that's how I approach the metrics, and really what I think are the most critical pieces of what we do.
Perfect, thank you. So you're utilizing it in a sense to create a pipeline.
Exactly.
Leah, do you want to share maybe how you utilize and use it in a sense of how this relates to the theme for resiliency?
Absolutely. So I would put this into kind of two different lenses. One is as an individual fundraiser, a portfolio manager who has metrics that you're working towards to get to your ultimate goal. I would break your metrics down so that you're utilizing it as a time management tool. The metrics aren't the goal. The metrics are your path to your goal. So let's say you have a meetings metrics for your whole year. You want to break that down into quarters, and then break it down even further into what am I going to be pursuing this week? How many donors do I need to ask to secure that number of meetings? Let's say your goal is to have 5 meetings this week. You have to probably ask for 20 meetings in order to get those 5. So the activity levels need to be much higher, and then they go down the funnel from your outreach to donors, and then the way that you're engaging with donors, and then moving towards those asks, which then translate into the revenue that you're generating. On the other side, if you're using metrics as a management tool to activate fundraisers on your team, I'd really highly recommend making them as simple, comprehensible, and usable as possible. There are a lot of different ways to make metrics very complex, and you can do a lot of cross-secting of the data, but if the team is not utilizing them, then it doesn't matter. So if you're implementing metrics for the first time, I would start small. Start with outbound interactions with donors. How many, if you can, parse out merged emails versus individualized emails, but if not, that's okay, just make it simple. The meetings, the actual face-to-face, voice-to-voice interactions, where you're learning more about the donors, you're advancing the relationship forward, you're understanding their philanthropic priorities and their positioning, and then asks. It's important to, obviously, we want to be asking for far more than we expect to raise from any portfolio. You want to have at least a 3 to 5 coverage ratio of how many asks you have versus the revenue from that portfolio that you're expecting to generate. And then obviously revenue as well. From that framework, then you can go much more complex about what type of actions that you're putting into your database with donors. Is it a meaningful interaction? Is it just a touch point? There are ways to make it a little bit more nuanced, but I would start with simple and then build layers once you've had full team adoption. And the last thing that I'll mention in terms of adoption for the team, this needs to be something that you're connecting with team members on a regular basis in one-on-ones. Have them pull a list from the database, and you'll hear me, I'm saying database a lot. If it's not in that database, it doesn't happen, it doesn't count. So you plan your future actions in the database, you pull information from it to track your past activity. And then they bring to you their list of, this is where I'm tracking towards my metrics for this month. This is where I see there's a gap between my goal and where I am right now. Let's talk about that. For example, if I'm having a lot of meetings, but I'm not making enough asks, we need to talk about how we're moving conversations from that kind of casual conversation, exploratory, into the ask conversation. But if there's a lot of asks and low revenue, then that's another type of conversation to train towards. How are we effectively making asks? Are we making asks at the right time? Are we making sure that the donor knows that we're going to be making an ask? The metrics can also be a really helpful teaching and training tool for your team to assess what's working and what's not working, and then you can course correct throughout the year. Oh, Beth, you're muted.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, database is probably, it's what the people give it. And so I probably say that on a daily basis. The computer can only do what we tell it to do. And the information is only as good as the clean information that we put in.
Absolutely.
So now taking the very eloquent and clean management plan that Layla put together, Michael, how do you use that on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so I'm in a little bit of a hybrid role. I'm a frontline fundraiser. I also manage a team of 3, so I'm in that kind of middle area as well. And so we certainly, as I mentioned, we certainly have annual metrics that we work towards. We break those down oftentimes to monthly goals, and even further, you know, if we need to ensure the activation of the metrics is producing the activity we want to see. And I think that's a throughput I'm hearing through a lot of us talking this afternoon. And so as we kind of cascade those annual goals down to bite-sized chunks, that's where we get metrics on a day-to-day basis. And I have found metrics helpful from to kind of map out where we're getting from A to B. I've also found metrics helpful with my team as an expression of how we're building community, right? So I tend to look at metrics that are a little bit more relationship based. Are we bringing people in? Are they staying with us? Are we maximizing the potential of that relationship? So I tend to gravitate towards metrics in that space as well. And I think it's really critical to keep in mind, especially for management, that this is never a straight line. You know, this ebbs and flows over time. But if we look at it holistically, if metrics are hit, we do see sustained results, you know, over time. So we need to ensure that we're setting up space for our team to kind of interact with these metrics and kind of make them their own and personalize it. And, you know, every Monday we sit down as a team and we look at metrics, and that's kind of a good fresh start to the week to understand where we need to be spending our time or where have we been spending our time. I think the balance needs to be found. And I don't know about the people on this call, but I didn't grow up wanting to be a fundraiser. Heck, I didn't even know fundraising like really existed as a profession until college. And so, you know, I'm here though, and I'm passionate about it, and it's the work that keeps me here, right? And so the metrics has to be able to fit into that type of environment. And what motivates me might not motivate my team member. So when we think of metrics on a day-to-day basis, we have to keep in mind kind of the more holistic environment and how those are expressed to our teams, and then obviously to the donors through them.
Thank you. So Melanie, bringing this to a team, I'm actually going to ask a 2-part question because we have a question in the comments that I just want to go back for 1 second. You mentioned soft metrics earlier, and there's a question in regards to soft metrics. If you could share an example of soft metrics.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so managing up, right, I would say is a soft metric because I'm a firm believer that leadership needs metrics, although sometimes I don't think they understand that. And so, you know, we have to all, and probably there's sometimes I don't understand that. You know, my team, I know members of my team are on here today, and I know they have to manage up sometimes too. But you know, it's really just taking a look at what are those things that are outside of those roles, the noise that happens outside, the things that are not put down on paper that we have to take in consideration. We also have to take in consideration, and Michael, you talked about, you know, some of your team members don't maybe adhere to some of the metrics that you think about. You know, we have to think about personalities and styles as well, right? So if anybody's ever done the DISC profiling, I'm one of those people, I love to pick up the phone and call, right? That's how I learned. I still thrive on that. I still think it's the number one way to contact folks. But there's a lot of people that don't, they fear that a little bit, or it's not comfortable. And so really meeting folks where they're at, you know, having those same goals and metrics in place, but making sure that we're saying, okay, so if this is not a comfort zone for you, what is, and then how can we still do things that are adding value to, you know, to the conversation for the donor?
Excellent, thank you. And so now related to your team, how have you utilized, you work with a relatively new major gifts team, or you have? How do you utilize metrics in helping with their success?
Sure. So a little bit of reference, Food Bank for New York City was really a direct mail organization until the pandemic. And this is across the board for most food banks. And we just were very lucky that people saw the need and, answered that call. And our leadership said, oh my gosh, we need to do something around this. And so, having metrics in place is, it sets the pace and the tone for the organization. And it also helps with time management as well, because if you know what you absolutely have to do, it really does help to say, like today's going to be a stewardship day. Today is going to be, my solicitation, I'm going to plan proposals, whatever it may be. It also not only adds internal accountability and enhanced accountability from our, fundraising side, but it also it provides enhanced accountability to our donors, right? So if we're doing this well, then we're giving our donors what they need. So I think that has been that's been a theme for definitely my team. And how do we do this well? Because everything we're doing is for the donor. It allows us to continually assess what's working, what's not working, to make shifts. So we can say, okay, you know what, this isn't really working. The emails are not working. There's not a high open rate. Okay, then what do we need to do to shift that? How can we capture the attention of the donors that we're trying to capture? Or it also allows us to tell leadership that this isn't working and here are the statistics behind that, right? So that there's actually a measure for them to take a look at. The other thing for me is celebrating, right? And I know a lot of people don't think about metrics and celebration, but for me, yes, the ultimate goal is the gifts, and that's fabulous, and we'll certainly celebrate those. But if we get somebody to respond to an email, somebody to pick up the phone, you have a great conversation, somebody said, yes, I'll come to that mission engagement tour, then that to me is way more important than that money, because that money will come. Again, planning for me, we're probably coming up on, it'll be like the third or fourth year where we've actually, I've been here for a year and a half and institute a little bit more metrics, but really taking a look, like, how long does it take our donors to make a major gift, right? Like, and all of the things that are working in there, right? And this is going back to that, that 18-month rule. That doesn't apply to everyone. There are people that love our mission, have an opportunity to engage with somebody, and we've got a $50,000 gift, bam. And then there's some people who are a little bit more thoughtful, and maybe 3 years from now we'll get a gift. So, and then I think the other thing, I just wrote something down, along that same line, is that how long is it taking our donors to increase their gifts? They may not be making that ultimate gift that we've been asking for, but maybe there's an increase. And so what are the steps that we took along the way? And maybe if we can do some analysis around that and say, hey, here's 50% of our database that's increased their gifts. What are we doing for that population? And then how can we, institute that along the way for, the rest of the organization?
Perfect. The tracking and analysis for the conversion rate is truly really crucial. And I love the celebration. That's so helpful.
Absolutely.
Layla, you're in a smaller organization. Can you share where fundraisers potentially could be spread a little bit thinner? How are metrics helpful in that environment?
Yes. Melanie said something that I really resonate with, which is metrics are a time management tool. And so I would start there and break it down. Let's say you're an executive director of a small organization and fundraising is 20% of your role. That's actually still 8 hours a week. And I would look at your week and plan out, how am I going to utilize these 8 hours? Okay, overall for the year, I need to rate, I have a portfolio of these 30 people. I need to interact with all of them through at least one meeting a year, hopefully more than that. Work my way back from meetings into outreach, into touch points, just to share information with them about what we're doing with the organization, et cetera. And then you break that down into your weekly plan of, if I'm trying to get 2 meetings a year with the 30 folks in my portfolio, and I have 8 hours this week, what am I going to do this week to get towards that ultimate goal? Just break it down into more tangible chunks. But even 50% of your role in fundraising, that's still only half of your time, but that's 20 hours a week. That's quite a significant period of time that you can utilize if you're intentional. Something that you'll hear us say a lot at Aperio is plan your work, then work your plan. Don't plan as you go because you're going to end up doing a lot of repetitive things. So spend a dedicated period of time at the beginning of your calendar year, at the beginning of your fiscal calendar, planning out, figuring out what your metrics are, what do you need to track towards, and what those specific goals are, looking at past performance, looking at future needs. Then you plan out your ask plans for each individual person in the portfolio, or if you're looking at a larger segmented list of your general donors, how much you need to raise, how many asks are you going to make on as a whole. And then you make a holistic plan for the metrics. What do they need to be? What is that broken down by quarter, by week, by month, etc. And then you spend the whole year just working that plan. And you're going to save a lot of time not revisiting constantly, but you've made a good plan at the beginning of the year, and then you just have to spend your time working towards that.
Excellent. So once you have your plan for each of these metrics, utilizing them in the most effective way possible makes them the most efficient. Development is development for a reason, because there's a developmenting process. Fundraising is neither really an art nor a science. It's technically really both. But Liz, for fundraising, how you slice and dice the data really, and learning about how you utilize these metrics. Can you share a little of the art, I guess, and the science, and how it becomes slightly more complex?
Yeah, absolutely. And the way that I often think about this is, and I think a couple of other people have referred to this as well. There's the data, there's all the numbers and the pieces and all of that piece, and then there's the interpretation of the data. And those are two very different things. And I think this is also where you've got analysis and analysts, and you've got fundraisers also looking at it, and we see very different things when we look at it. The results may, we all can read the same results, but often then what fundraisers are bringing to it is, okay, yes, I've seen this every year for 30 years. And yes, we often see this, and I'm sure everybody does in some of the data that we do. Donors want to know more about where their money's going. This is a perennial thing that we see. And so it's also bringing that knowledge to it of, okay, people are always saying this, and we've tried all these different things. And so is there something else under that people are really asking and questioning? So having that willingness to not just take the data as you get it, but to say, how does this fit into the reality that I know about donors and how they work and function? I think the other part of it, and a big thing that we've been doing here at the ACLU, is we've created a principles document behind some of our metrics to say, essentially, why is this important and why did we set up this number? So for instance, when I'm working on grassroots fundraising and we're doing mass marketing, acquisition is incredibly expensive, and it's always the first thing every board wants to cut because it's a huge line on your expenses. And so we put into writing to say, we believe that it's going to take this amount of time to return that investment, and we are okay with that. And putting that out there so that then you're making sure that when your metrics start showing that, because inevitably you lose money on acquisition in the first year, it's to be able to say, yes, we knew that, and we prepared for that. And these are the data points that we're looking at to make sure that that investment makes sense over time. So it's ensuring that neither side, neither the industry knowledge, sort of like Melanie said, that's like, oh, it's 18 months. And so now that's what we're all going to do. It's saying, this is what the industry says, but we've also looked at our own numbers, and we think that we are comfortable with this kind of investment and decision making to reach these metrics in this amount of time, so that we're just very clear on, almost before you get the data, what is it going to mean to you and how are you going to read and interpret that?
Thank you. So Michael, higher ed is known for metrics, but not always in a good way. What would you say the key is to ensuring that those metrics are motivational, I guess, rather than discouraging?
Well, I have a heavy weight on my shoulder speaking for all of higher education here, but I will answer in very general terms, as not to offend anybody. But I think that effectiveness and emotion need to be considered here, right? Our fundraisers are messengers, right? They are sent out to do the good work of engaging donors and our communities, and the emotions and motivations they feel are often tied to the metric kind of culture of our organization and how we express those metrics. So this is really where we lean on good mid-management individuals within our teams, right? These are the people that can take oftentimes a very data-driven focus from the top and from the board and from the leadership, and then be able to translate that kind of metric, kind of data focus into something that is human-centered, right? That can then motivate the teams. And I think this is an important time to really look at the data analytics and AI influence on fundraising. And it's the Wild West right now. There's new software packages out there everywhere. You can put a lot of information into data systems and data structures. But that's always going to be there going forward, because leaders are always going to look for ways to make sure their fundraisers are being most effective. But we really need to have that focus on the human-centered aspect of this. Not only is that important to how it expresses itself to our donors, but if that culture is strong, you're going to be more successful as a leader, because fundraisers will want to be part of your organization, your university, your teams. And so it's a win-win if we can get this balance on metrics and emotion kind of correct moving forward.
Absolutely. So selecting those metrics that are going to have donors want to become invested in your mission and your movement. So Melanie, how would you say you select key metrics or metrics that would be most effective, those that matter in your?
Sure. I mean, I think, using the metrics to inform our next steps and growth for the team and for the organization, really asking questions: are they adding value or to overall, team and organizational excellence? And then how, right? So we have to really take a look at those. And then of course, we have to look at the our job, right? Retention, increase in donors, or increase in dollars, reacquisition, for some of those lapsed donors. I think the other thing is, again, like probably another soft metric is, does everybody feel good? Right? I mean, is everybody feeling good? Yes, there's always going to be metrics. There's, I don't know of any organization you'll go to that doesn't have some sort of metrics, but does everybody feel good about this? And then the other thing is one last thing I probably should have said before that is, are donors engaging with us more, right? Is there increased participation at events? Are they waving back to us? Are they having conversations with us? Do they pick up the phone, right? So do we have a good sense of what we're doing actually is building that key, relationship of trust? So that to me is like, those are the things that really I look at, right? When I have somebody, pick up the phone or call me back, I literally am just jumping for joy, and that's what really matters at the end.
Layla, would you say, could metrics in any capacity be used to maybe build new revenue streams or utilized in a way to build different channels of giving, maybe in the corporate sector or prospecting, and have you experienced positive return in that way?
Yeah, excuse me. Earlier, we were talking about utilizing metrics to try new things or to take risks. And it's a helpful framework to test a new theory or a new idea. So for example, if you have a couple of corporate relationships and really want to build upon those, create some metrics and an overall goal to really give it a fair chance. We've talked a lot about how metrics are important. This is why we have them in place. This is how we utilize them. I think it's a helpful way to pull us back to, our panel today is about resiliency, that resilient relationships, whether that's with an individual, with a corporation, with a foundation, are authentic. And the way that we build resilient relationships is by having a foundation that is strong and getting to that two-way interaction. So before I go into that, there's a question in the chat that I can respond to about that specifically. But circling back to the new revenue streams, what I would do is create a path towards your intended goal. So let's say you want to grow from 10 current corporate partnerships to 50. Figure out how many you need to qualify, do the research to identify these corporate partners, provide volunteer opportunities, think about engagement frameworks for the corporations. A lot of times corporates like to engage with nonprofits beyond just writing a check. So having them volunteer, having them provide in-kind support to the organization, et cetera. And then identify what are the inputs that we need to generate the outputs that we're desiring, AKA those 50 relationships. If we're trying to grow from 10 to 50, then we're going to have to identify maybe 100 new potential prospects and then begin that qualification process. And the metrics that you develop are that path towards the intended overall goal. And then just while I'm unmuted, going back to what I was saying earlier about these relationships, none of us got into fundraising because, or I will posture to believe that none of us got into fundraising because we love metrics, because they are exciting, because they're energizing. And some people might describe them as such. And if you do, that's great for you. I personally don't. I got into fundraising because I believe that nonprofits have the capacity to truly change this world. And to be honest, because I'm a person that is fueled by anger and frustration. And there are so many things in my community that make me angry that shouldn't be the way that they are. And I believe that there are things that we can and should and are required to do to make our communities, to make our world a better place for all of us. And the way that we build these resilient relationships, when I think about what is a resilient relationship, it can stand the test of time. It can withstand unforeseen circumstances. The person on the other side of the relationship will stand with you through difficult times. So many of our organizations saw this happen through COVID, this completely unforeseen, in most of our lifetimes, unexperienced global pandemic that affected all of us personally and then our organizations and the communities that we served. The donors that stuck with us were those resilient relationships. And the way that we build these types of strong relationships is by having a lot of interactions beyond just making an ask. So what I'm referring to when I say moving beyond transactional relationships is, I would say it's a failure in our relationships with donors if all we're doing is making an ask and then thanking them for their gift and then waiting 12 months and then making that ask all over again. We build real relationships through lots of touch points. It would be very odd in a friendship if you only had one dinner a year with your friend and you sat down and talked to them for 3 hours and it was amazing and meaningful and deep, and then you never talk to them again for 12 months. Interspersed between these meaningful dinners is a text sending a meme. It's a walk in the park. It's a, I'm so frustrated about my life, please help me outreach. It's authentic. It's two ways. It's deep. And the only way to build that type of relationship is through engagement. So the metrics are the way that we hold ourselves and then we hold each other accountable to make sure that that activity remains high. And frankly, the sending an email to a donor just because is never going to fall into, if you're thinking about the hierarchy of urgent versus important, it's never going to fall into the category of urgent and important. It's something that we know we should do. Having the metrics in place and actually holding ourselves and each other accountable to them ensures that the activities we know we should and need to be doing actually get prioritized.
Yeah, I see everyone shaking their heads. So are there other comments on this? When I teach my course on donor analysis and prospect management, what I try to share is that it's simplifying the moves management plan and not thinking that it's a big scary thing that you have to put together, and thinking about it as a relationship building process. And what exactly would you do to build a relationship with anyone? And that's exactly what it is for a donor. And what are those steps to take to solidify that relationship? and to think about it in that same process and not these scary technical terms, and almost doing the same thing. So the moves management plan that you're almost laying out, Leila, is exactly the same thing. So I don't know, Liz or Melanie or Michael, do you have other comments that you might want to add before we move on to other questions?
I think, so hi, this is Liz. I think the one thing that I would add is, I think your point is really well taken, Leah, and that the challenge is often that the metrics get in the way of the people. And this is a conversation I often have, particularly on the mass marketing side, where it's like, oh, well, we'll have a 3% failure rate. I'm like, hold on. What is a failure rate? That means 3% of the people that have decided to, out of anger, out of passion, out of, their greatest desire to support us now got dropped off the list, or their address is wrong, or whatever. And so how do we always bring those two pieces together? And that is a little bit of the art and science of remembering that, yes, it's a data point, but we're actually talking about a person who literally wrote a check and decided to invest in this work and what we're doing. And how are we making sure that, yes, you have to have a certain error rate that you're willing to live with, but also how are we taking care of the people that are involved in that?
And Beth, if I could, this is Michael. I just want to add how important time is to this whole situation. At Cal State Fullerton, we finished a campaign in December 2022. It was our first comprehensive campus-wide campaign ever in the history of the university, under then Vice President Greg Sachs. We raised $270 million, which was fantastic. But what that showed me and my team going through a campaign was the ability to think longer than the 12-month cycle when we're considering metrics, right? And it was actually rather freeing to think about, how can we engage a donor in a 2-year, 3-year situation, right? And some of the most meaningful gifts and largest gifts I've ever worked on have been when a donor has said to me, this is what I can do for you now, but in 2 years, 3 years, I want to work towards this. And I think it's really important to recognize in this kind of fiscal year focus that we consider time and how we might work in more time-based metrics with longer runways for our teams going forward.
I echo what everybody else has been saying. I think the one other thing that we really have to think about is that metrics, and if they're well documented, actually tell a story that we can have with our leadership. And then we can also, I've worked with many leaders throughout my lifetime, and, I think they don't understand sometimes just the important role that they play in all of this. And I think if we can show them, like, oh, well, you remember you went with Mary, and, after Mary met with you, she doubled her gift, right? And she's now attending this. I mean, so I think, being able to, it really helps open that conversation that you have with leadership, your leadership, because it's important to have that communication, because I'm sure everyone has had this. I'm assuming, shouldn't say everybody, but where somebody comes down and says, oh, well, this didn't happen, or this didn't happen. Oh, they got $1 million gift over there, and he's one of our donors too. And there's so many things that, so many factors, but we can, when we have those metrics that we're showing, this is what we're working toward, maybe he was involved with that organization for 20 years. And that might have been his ultimate gift. We have, so there's a lot of things that go into it. So for me, being able to use the metrics to show just exactly what we're doing and the success we're having doing it, rather than having, people be critical.
Absolutely. And remembering that metrics in the fundraising landscape are not always numerical and quantifiable. They're data points of a donor journey or the donor experience, and how you're getting them from point A to point all the way to point Z, and what your optimal goal is. So you are telling that story. So you're not actually able to quantify, but you are able to see that journey that they're taking. I do want to get to a few of the questions before we close out. So one of the questions are, do any panelists have any board metrics for fundraising beyond 100% board participation? And if so, any tips on metrics for boards that are motivational?
I can take a first crack at that one. advise two boards in two of my colleges with the deans. They're like kind of deans level boards. We do have 100% participation goal. And we do communicate a lot about leadership giving and the dean circle that we have in each of those. I will say at the university, we have a board of governors. They have much higher minimums that are kind of engaged. They also have goals of bringing people in. So invitations to other people that are in their network to come to our events and things like that. And that one I think is more on the relationship building community side than maybe just the dollars and cents. But those are kind of the things that exist. I do think having board goals as far as giving is really important to have.
Anyone else? Okay. There's a question for Liz. Liz, would you be willing to repeat the name of the type of document that you created along with metrics to help describe the reason and values for the selected metrics?
Sure, yeah. This is Liz speaking again. We just call it it's a principles document, but in the specific case that I'm thinking of, it was around our acquisition program. And so in some ways, it actually relates to one of the other questions that somebody asked about what data do you present to the board, and how do you keep it from getting distracting? Because particularly when you're looking at mass marketing metrics, acquisition 1% return is pretty great, and this is the kind of thing that if you're in fundraising, that if you're not, that looks abysmal, and there's and that's fair. So we kind of think of it as it's almost the stuff that you just assume and that as a fundraiser, and they're like, yeah, it's going to take 36 months to get a return on investment, or all of these different things. And we just wrote it out in a document in plain language so that people who aren't in fundraising could understand it, so that when you're presenting the data, you can sort of look and say, what was kind of going through their head when they made the decisions that they made that resulted in these outcomes, so that it's very clear that it wasn't the dollar amount, it was the amount of people we were going to get on, because we know that if we get on this many people, it will ideally bring us in this much money on the other side. So yeah, we just call it a principles document. It's a one-page piece that we have. We have about 7 or 8 things in it, but it really it takes essentially all that stuff that we as fundraisers have in our brain that we know about how we approach the work, and just describes it for people so that when they're looking at the metrics, we can sort of say like, oh yeah, well, we did that because if you look at point 3, it's because we think it's going to take 3 years to get a return on investment for that piece. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Leah, you said something earlier about moving away from transactional funding and something that is more beneficial for both parties. Can you expand a bit more on that?
Sure. I touched on this a little bit when I was speaking earlier, but I would just say it boils down to we want to engage with donors outside of just making an ask. And I would say also outside of just reporting on the impact of that one gift, that we want to create holistic, robust relationships. That's where they become strong and resilient. And the metrics are a way to hold ourselves accountable in order to do that. I'll also mention Michael was sharing about metrics for the board. And then there's another question about like reporting metrics to the board. And I was thinking and didn't have enough time when you said, does anyone else have thoughts? And I have some thoughts now. For metrics for the board, I would think about what their specific role is in fundraising. So if they have a give-get framework, you want to be certainly reporting back to them on their own activities. Just like we would do for fundraisers, we want for their metrics to go beyond just the dollar revenue goals. And going back to what Melanie was sharing earlier, really have places to celebrate and encourage the behavior that you want to continue to see from your board. So if someone invited a friend to an event and they came with them, we want to publicly celebrate that because we want for other board members to do the same thing. That's kind of one side on making sure that you're reporting on their own specific goal and role in fundraising. The other piece is, Liz, I really appreciated what you were saying about making the metrics comprehensible to the reader, particularly someone who isn't themselves utilizing those metrics, to make sure that they're not misinterpreted or misunderstood. I would make metrics that you're reporting back to the board incredibly simple, and then provide descriptions of why you have them in place. The reason that we have a meetings goal for the team is because we know that if we have this percentage of meetings, it results in this number of asks, which results in this number of secured gifts. That's why we track that metric. This is how we're tracking. And I would keep it simple. If you break down your meetings between virtual and in person, if you break down your interactions between meaningful and just like a simple touch point, I wouldn't report that level of detail to your board. Keep it big picture, keep it high level, and focus on the why behind that metric.
I think I'm going to add just a little bit to that. So, you know, at least the boards that I've worked with and interacted with, they really want to know how many donors, you know, what's the retention rate, acquisition, reacquisition. I think one of the things that's super important about relaying those particular metrics to the board, and especially also, what's the ROI per fundraiser on the team, and what are because they're always looking at the dollars, right? Let's face it, they may understand the other metrics, but they really are holding us accountable for raising funds, is that when we do that, we can actually ask for additional investment. Because if we can show and prove like what every single fundraiser is doing for the organization, and hey, guess what? Another fundraiser will add $1.5 million to our revenue over time, right? Because we've got to set that expectation. But you know, for me, the metrics also are just a way to add value to your budget.
So piggybacking, I guess, on sharing metrics with your board, how do you choose what you share and which data points and metrics you do share with your boards and leadership, making sure that they're not misinterpreted or distracting?
I mean, I think the year over year, right, metrics are important. And again, what I'm talking, when we talk, just what I just said is the number of donors, the retention, the reacquisition, the acquisition as well. And then, so those are the things that I know that we report out. And then on our development committee, they ask questions and things like that, but it's not for the broader, group for discussion. Again, they really, honestly, every board that I've ever worked with is always just really interested in the dollars. Now they do want to know how they get there. And then, so whoever asked the question about the board, and metrics that you set for your board and things like that, listen, that's a question I think that it's the $500 million question, right? Because sometimes you have great boards and they understand and they've been philanthropists their entire life and they're just fabulous and motivated. And then you have those boards that, they're just really maybe passionate about what you do and they don't have the capacity or really are not philanthropists. And so at some point in time, maybe we'll all get to a point where we have those board members that are our champions, and that's the hope.
So I think we have one more question, but I think we want to conclude. I'm sorry. Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for participating today. Thank you so much to all of our speakers and to Apiro Philanthropy. And I'm going to say good afternoon to everyone. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Have a good day.